My name's Natalie Ridler. I'm here to talk to Karen and Beck about my experience with and my grief journey with my son Morgan.
Hi, welcome to Room to Grieve podcast. We're your hosts, Karen and Beck. Grab yourself a cuppa, find a comfortable spot, and we'll journey through grief together.
So thank you very much for joining us, Natalie. Really appreciate you being here. There is so much that I want to talk to you about. I know that we have chatted quite a bit before because I came across Morgan's journey, and Morgan passed away not long after Bradley and Emily. So we're all sort of on the same trajectory, really, aren't we, in our grief space? So it's just quite interesting. But I know that you've been doing lots of amazing work too. So do you want to start by just telling us about Morgan?
Of course I do. Any chance to speak about Morgan, really, and say his name, isn't it? So Morgan was born in 2019 and perfectly normal. Everything was fine. And his little sister Rhiannon joined us in 2021. And when she was about 5 months old, we noticed that Morgan was changing a little bit. He was putting a lot of weight on. He had some quite suspicious symptoms, such as like he was growing pubic hair and he was only 2. And it was all just a bit odd. And we were back and forth to the doctors for a long time and we couldn't get to the bottom of anything. And we ended up going for private healthcare. And that was when it was identified that he had a large abdominal tumour. And he was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer called an adrenal cortical carcinoma. So it was a tumour on his adrenal gland on top of his kidney. And it was producing lots of cortisol and testosterone, which was the reason for all his strange symptoms and probably the reason why it wasn't picked up, because nobody really knew what to do with him. So we were, accused of overfeeding him quite a bit. And eventually, so when Rhiannon, I think she was just turned 5 months old, and we were admitted straight into Rainbow Ward and Noah's Ark Hospital in Cardiff. And it all started from there, really, in 2021, October 2021, he was diagnosed. And he did fight well for 2 years. He had life-saving surgery in Birmingham Children's Hospital. He had 8 rounds of chemo. Unfortunately, it did spread to his lungs, so he had lung surgery in Great Ormond Street. So we were back and forth a bit, but all his treatment was in Cardiff, mostly in terms of his chemotherapy. So he did 8 rounds of chemotherapy and he did go into remission, but unfortunately relapsed within 3 months. And that relapse didn't respond to immunotherapy, chemotherapy. And he was put on palliative care in June last year, and transferred to T Havan Children's Hospice in Cardiff 14 days later. And that's when he passed away.
God, that sounds like you had so much to deal with there. I mean, just the accusations, when you know that something's wrong with your child, and that fight in itself is hard, isn't it? And really tough.
It was incredibly frustrating, especially since I work in healthcare and I've been, a qualified physiotherapist. I've worked in hospitals. I like to think that I have a relatively well-educated instinct, I think, but I'm also a mother as well. But it seemed to me when I was going into these GP appointments that being a mother meant I was almost looked at unfavourably, because I must be just over-anxious. I must
irrational.
Just be, irrational, getting it wrong. And I remember saying to a doctor once, surely it's not normal for a 2-year-old to be growing pubic hair. Surely that's not normal. And because he was overweight, the doctor said to me, well, overweight children do grow excess body hair. And I remember something going off in my head and I was thinking, that's not true. And at this point, they'd felt Morgan's tummy about 7 times and told me it was normal. So that was what kind of like the point that made me go, I'm going to have to go and find someone that's willing to sit down and properly listen to me. I was tired of being told I needed to go on healthy eating courses, being told to keep food diaries that no one ever read, because Morgan didn't eat badly at all. He had quite a healthy appetite, but he was starving all the time. And I was sitting there going, this isn't normal. And I was actually breastfeeding Rhiannon at the time, and Morgan was still breastfeeding. So I was breastfeeding the two of them. And one doctor said to me, well, that's because you're breastfeeding your toddler, the newborn, the baby's milk, and it's too fatty for the toddler. And I'm sitting there going, well, that's not science at all either. That's just your opinion. And you're a male. What would you know about breastfeeding? And there were so many things I found so frustrating, because in my heart of hearts, I knew it wasn't right. But it was almost like the blame was being flipped back onto me as a mother. And every time Matt, my husband, took Morgan, he got a little bit further than I did. And it was like, oh, it must be serious because Dad's bringing him to the GP surgery.
Wow.
And there were so many times where I was just like, well, why, how come you got that far? And I'm still being told that I'm over anxious. So we did eventually manage to get them to refer us to paediatrics. I actually said to the GP, you are not meant to be an expert in everything. You are supposed to be like the signposter. You're supposed to assess and look at my child and say, right, this is beyond me. You need to go and see a child health specialist. And it was almost like they were gatekeeping that service from me. Didn't want to waste their time. So I ended up paying privately to go and see, because Morgan was under 3, a lot of private doctors wouldn't see him because private hospitals aren't built up for children under 3. So they'll only see after 3. So I managed to convince a nephrologist, so a kidney doctor, to please, like a paediatric one, to please just sit down with me for 5 half hour. So I pay you full rate. Please just sit down and listen to me about my son. And it all kind of snowballed from there, because he felt Morgan's tummy that had been felt by this GP 7 times and said, well, his liver's really enlarged. And I said, well, that's the first thing I've ever heard about it. And he said, well, I'm going to speak to the paediatric doctor you've been referred to in Swansea, where we live, and I'll try and expedite this appointment for you. And he did. And as soon as we saw that child health expert, he looked me in the eye and he said, I have read something recently, and I think I know what this is, but I'm not going to say anything until we've scanned him. And I was like, scanned him? And he was like, we're going to send him for an ultrasound on his tummy. And this was on the Tuesday, and he sent us on the Thursday. And on the Thursday, when they scanned him, he had a 13 centimetre tumour in his abdomen. And
wow.
I'm sitting there going, how was this
missed?
How was it missed?
Yeah.
How was you blamed repeatedly?
Yeah.
And I'm still in a little bit of disbelief about it, really. But then I speak to so many parents now through the charity that I can see it's quite a common occurrence to be batted back and forth.
Yeah.
And so we did start a campaign called Trust Your Instincts, which encouraged parents to, yes, seek out primary healthcare and explain what the issues were and why they were concerned, but also to advocate if they don't feel they're being listened to, and what they can say to GPs and what their rights are. Because, you have a right to speak to another GP in the surgery. You have a right to ask for a second opinion from a different GP surgery. You have a right to ask for a referral to secondary services if you feel that something's wrong. And the biggest part of what I say about the campaign is, chances are it's not cancer, but it might be. And the earlier we catch it, the better the outcomes are for so many different types of cancer. And it's only through my experience that I kind of felt the need to do that, because it pains me that there are parents that are still out there that this will still happen to again, that they're still going to go to their GP surgeries and be told that there's nothing wrong. And the next thing you know, your world's being turned upside down. But it's even worse after having to fight for so long, because I always have to live with the fact now that Morgan was growing a cancer for at least 5 months that I knew about. It was already had to have been quite late stage for him to start developing those late stage symptoms. So he could have been growing that cancer for a year. We don't know. And now I'll never know. And I'll never know if he would have survived if they'd listened to me at my first appointment. And me and my husband have to live with that. And I'm not sure if the GP does.
No, the GP won't. No.
Yeah, that's tough, isn't it? Those those questions. I think we talk about it quite a bit, that guilt and that weight that you carry with you over things that you do and the choices you make and the decisions. They weigh really heavy when something like this happens and when someone's died, because that's all you have left, isn't it? Is to ruminate and go over and over and over every decision that you make. So I definitely think that the whole trust your instincts thing, like, you know, we speak to many people now who sadly are in our position, and most people say the same, that in their gut they knew, you know, and it really is trust your instincts. There was lots with Bradley, not so much in his initial diagnosis, because his was all very quick. It happened just like that, and we didn't really get any warning. But during his treatment, where I had to stand up and learn to advocate for him and, you know, learn to tell professionals no, you know, because actually, you know, I do know best in this instant, and I know my child and I know what's going on, and actually you need to listen to me. And you have, and there was time when my husband would say to me, you can't say that to them. I can, and I have, because I have to, you know, and it's just knowing that it is okay to be brave and say those things, isn't it?
I think it's learning the difference between advocating for someone and just being angry, because what I found in general, having once worked for the NHS and now been someone who's been through this process with the NHS, especially through COVID, you know, there was a lot of this thank you NHS, clapping your NHS workers, which I completely and utterly agree with. But at the same time, society saying we should be grateful for the NHS, therefore we can't question it. And there were so many times where I was thinking, I don't want to question you, my son's consultant, who is a very experienced consultant and is brilliant, you know, and is helping trying to save my son. But sometimes I need to sit back and go, what's your reasoning? I need to know the answers. And actually, I think that there are better ways. I've read better research. Can you explain to me why we can't do this? Or can I have a second opinion on that? And it was unnatural for me to learn to do that. And I think so many parents lack the confidence to advocate rather than the advocacy skills, because they feel like they can't question.
Because they're not educated. They're uneducated in that field. So what, you know, what right do we have to question? I totally get that.
You just trust them, don't you? I mean, I remember ringing Emily's doctor and saying she had whooshing noises in her head. That is, you know, it's a sign of a brain tumour. The whooshing noises in her head. They'll give her antihistamines. So I was actually quite, all right, okay. Thought nothing else of that, because I don't know anybody who's ever had a brain tumour. Why would I Google anything about brain tumours when she's got whooshing sounds in her head? I just wouldn't have done.
I think there's an element for us as parents as well, is that we never want to consider that possibility.
No.
I think when I look back, and hindsight is a horrible thing when you're grieving, I think, sometimes, because you obviously can't go back and change it now anyway. That as a, you know, relatively well-educated person in healthcare, there were signs that I knew pointed to cancer, but I chose not to acknowledge in my head. So I remember my husband works, he's a defence solicitor, he knows the law inside out, but when it comes to healthcare, you know, that's not his area of expertise. So he would often turn to me and ask me questions. And I think there's so many times I used to say to him, I don't know, Matt, I don't know. But I did know. And it was easier to say I don't know than to admit what I did know and what that might mean. And I remember Matt getting really frustrated with me sometimes, because, you know, he says to me now, he goes, you knew. And I was like, I know I knew, but I didn't want to admitting that would have been like admitting defeat almost. And also for Matt as well, like if I was like his wife, the other person who's supposed to be holding up the other end of hope, really, for me to turn around and say I'd lost hope would completely and utterly devastate him. And, you know, you carry the weight of that with your partner as well, don't you? And your other children and your family around you. That, you know, I remember telling all my family that Morgan had been transferred onto palliative care. And I just remember the complete and utter devastation and all the questions and everyone being like, this can't be happening. And I'm saying, but it is, and this is what we've got to deal with. And everyone had so many questions, but there wasn't a single answer for any of those questions, those really big questions, like how long and why, and is there nothing else that anyone can do? And when we announced, because we we kind of documented the whole journey, and it started off as me documenting my own thoughts about the journey, really, and then it became easier to document them publicly because I have quite a big family, and it was easier just to keep them all updated at the same time. And then we started amassing a following, and I'm sitting there going, actually, no, it's really important that people know what Morgan is going through and what he has to go through and what we have to go through as parents, because there's so little research for children's cancers anyway, that I almost felt like, all right, maybe this is not so much the reason we're going through it, but maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. Maybe this is why I was destined to have this child who was destined to be so poorly. And maybe this is the difference I'm supposed to be making in the world somehow. And that kind of made it feel a little bit easier in my head, gave me purpose, I think, is the reason, and control over things that where I had no control. In Morgan's life, I couldn't treat him, I couldn't be his doctor, I couldn't make those big decisions, but what I could do was share how brave he was being, and and share how wonderful he was, and all the children that were around him as well. But as time goes on, we've got everything documented, so it's so heartfelt, and I can go back and I can follow the whole journey from the start, and it's really outstanding when I look back and think like what we all went through and what we had to do as parents. And Matt even said to me yesterday, he goes, does it not just hit you sometimes how much that little boy went through at 2 and 3 years old, and then to pass, and he asked me the question, he said, what is this all for? And I said, we went through all that and we walked away empty-handed. And I kind of feel like it all had to be for something.
No, I get that. That's what we feel.
Well,
yeah. No, I get that totally.
We have to make it easier for other people. Not that we can make grief any easier, but what we can do is tell people that you're not alone and what you're feeling is normal, and it's okay to be angry or not angry or be however you want to be, because no one's grief journey is linear.
And it keeps the kids alive, and that's why we do it. It gives us a reason to talk about Bradley and Emily all the time, because we just want to stand and shout their name from the rooftops, because you worry, don't you, that they're just going to be forgotten. That's that's
the biggest fear, isn't it? Is that they're just going to, obviously they'll never disappear into the ether for us, but
for everybody else.
Just.
Plus, we also want everybody to know, the same as Morgan, just how brave they was. What they went through is just unbelievable.
And the impact they leave on the world behind them, I suppose, because as mothers, they've left a huge impact on us, not only through their birth and their life and how we raised them and the interactions we had with them, but also with how we interact with them now that they've left us. And, interactions are very different now. They're rainbows and robins and silly little signs of things. Like when I was in Tesco's yesterday, a Hot Wheels car fell off the shelf. And whenever we went into Tesco's, we always had to go and buy a Hot Wheels car, and Morgan had thousands of Hot Wheels cars.
Did you buy the one yesterday?
I didn't buy it. I put it back on the shelf because he already has that one.
I'd have bought it.
He already has that one, and but it brought me memories back when I looked at it, and it just felt like at that moment, and this is why I've always been kind of, a religious person anyway, and so I do believe in a heaven and an afterlife, and I do speak to a lot of parents who don't. But I always think, if there's really nothing after, then why do these things keep happening to me? It can't all be happenstance. And I find that really comforting in a way, to know that he is able to communicate to me in some ways, and always manages to be the right
when
way.
You need him. When you need him.
Right when you need him. And I don't know how that happens, or how that can be a coincidence. But before Morgan had cancer, even as a religious person, sometimes you hear people talking about things happening at the right times, or things falling off shelves and stuff like that. And I'd always be a bit like, oh, all right then.
Me too.
And now I am that person that sees a little white feather and goes, hi, Morgs. My mum's been on holiday recently, and she said that every morning she'd get up, she'd be the one that put the towels on the sunbeds in the morning. They went with their friends, and she went every single morning. They were there for a whole week. She'd sit down on her sunbed, and a single white feather would float down on the sunbed next to her. And she said it happened every single morning. And I said, a logical person would say, well, there's probably a white bird in a nest up there, and it's just you're noticing it. But for it to happen every morning, and sitting there, Morgan was saying, I can't believe you didn't take Natalie on holiday with you. That's probably what he was saying.
Yeah, he was saying, my mum would have loved to have come. She should be on this bed.
Would have loved an all-inclusive holiday. Thank you. But it is incredible. And that's the mark that they've left now, that we go looking for those signs. And I think it's made me notice a lot of beauty in places where I probably would never have seen it before, really. And
that whole saying, "Sky looks different when someone you love up there," my God, for me, that really hits home. Like, I seem to have this obsession with the sky, with sunsets, sunrises, stars.
It does feel like a sort of language now, though. And like people say, like we can't really explain it to people who haven't been through it. But I know that there are people listening to this that'll be sitting there going, yeah, I do that. But like we've got wind chimes in the garden, and they always seem to manage to go off at the right time. And we often have Rianne on at the minute, running around in the garden enjoying the sunshine, and as she's giggling, the wind chimes are going, and I'm sitting there going, he's here with her, and she talks about him an awful lot. And it's been really comforting that she, being as young as she is, really, she is quite perceptive anyway, but I know she puts a lot of people on the back foot because she is so straight about it. Like, she will tell a stranger in Tesco's that she has a brother in heaven, and the stranger in Tesco's is like, oh, and is looking at me like horrified, and I'm sitting there going, she just wants to tell you about her brother. It's okay, like it's fine. I'd much rather she was able to talk openly about him, because
this is why we want to work in grief education and start as young as possible, because they're so much better at it than us.
I think it's about learning that empathy and compassion don't have to be kind of like hemmed in. Like, why in society is it so expected for us to hide our grief to make other people comfortable, and to kind of sit down and say, okay, it's over now, let's move on with life? Because people do often say, yeah, how do you move on from such a profound life experience as having a child? Giving birth to a child is one profound life experience, isn't it? And losing a child is just, well, it's beyond profound. It's
the unthinkable.
It's horrible. It could almost kill people, and I think it does. It killed who I was before. I had to be reborn as a whole new person that now carries grief with me, and I'm not the same person I was before. And I don't think I ever want to be that person again. That person was carefree and, didn't go through. But now I understand so much more about the world and other people that I'm sitting there going, that's the gift that Morgan's given me, is how to be more empathetic and more compassionate, and how I can really help people going through grief by just saying, not the old pleasantries that we've all heard a million times, that I've been guilty of saying myself, like, they're in a better place now. And I often say to people, no, the best place would be with me. And that's not comforting, because I don't want them to be in a better place. I want them here with me. And things like, he's out of pain now. Like, well, of course I'm grateful for that, but I'm not. He's out of pain, but my whole family's been thrown into a world of pain. So that pain's not gone anywhere. It's just been transferred to someone else.
Yeah. We make so many excuses, or we sort of like apologise to people that say the wrong things to us, and but it's on actually a bereaved parents chat yesterday, and somebody was saying that they're sick of making those excuses, and that now if people want to say the right thing, they should look into it, because they Google everything else. Why not Google how to talk to a bereaved friend? Or why not ask the bereaved friend?
I think I feel so strongly about it because I've been that person. So I feel like I can see it from two sides of the cone now. You think you don't know what to say, and so you say something, anything, to fill that silence that comes after that moment.
I was that silver lining person, that tried to fix it, that tried to spin a positive on it. That was me. I was so guilty. And I thought that was the right thing to do, I'll be honest.
I think that's what we're taught to do.
Yeah.
Where did we learn to say those phrases? Are they not just things that we've heard somewhere that we've just repeated for the rest of our life verbatim?
Yeah. I had no idea how invalidating trying to cheer someone up out of this was, because I don't think I understood that you just can't be cheered up out of it.
I think I read something that really hit me earlier, because it was just one of these quotes that pops up on Instagram. And I think it said, by using that placation, you've not only invalidated my pain, you've not made my pain go away, you've not made me any better, but you've taught me that I shouldn't be talking to you about it. And that's why, kind of like when you say you're a different person now, like your relationships with people change.
Oh, yeah. Yes, yeah.
And your ability to tolerate certain things, like that drama, gossip, sort of stuff like that. I don't really have that kind of tolerance for it now, and I often sit back, and I spent the first couple of months like trying to like go back to doing the things I might have done before Morgan was diagnosed, socialising and going places with groups of friends, and I'd be sat amongst all these people that are my friends and feeling completely and utterly alone, even though I'm surrounded by people that do love me. And I had to sit back and say, I am not the person that they loved before. They don't know how to speak to me anymore, and they just say what they think they need to say, and they're just, by doing so, they're alienating me even more, because I really want them just to turn around and say, you know what, this is really shit. I don't know what to say to you. I would rather they said that to me than come up with absolute tosh that means nothing to nobody. We went to see Billy Joel in Cardiff on Friday.
Nice.
Me and Matt.
My friend went there on Friday.
Oh, it was amazing. But we bumped into a friend we hadn't seen for so long, and he just looked at Matt, and Matt just looked at him and said, mate, look, it's better to say nothing at all than to say something wrong. I promise you. And that's kind of where Matt is at with it now. He's like, if you don't know what to say,
don't say anything.
Say nothing. It's easier, just I find, to do that thing, just a tap on the shoulder or just a quick grip there, just to be like, that's enough. And that says more than words can ever say. It's just saying, I'm here.
Yeah.
And that solid reminder that someone is there when you've got this this huge hole in you that's never ever going to be full ever again. But you just need to be reminded that there is solid weight and solid support behind you to prop you up.
You saying you kind of changed as a person, and when you go out with your friendships and things, it's the same. I just feel like I don't even think I know who I am yet and what I enjoy completely. But yeah, I do find that I sit there in this empty space just thinking, this isn't me anymore, and I don't really know where I need to be and what I need to do.
I think we've been busy at weekend and I hadn't seen you, and by Sunday I actually felt ill again and very weepy. And then I think I think it was Monday when I was in work and you'd come out of work, so we'd gone a long time, probably like 24 hours of not
which
speaking.
is a long time for us not
which
to
is a
talk.
long time. And soon as I spoke to you on Monday, I felt better. And it's like when you was going back to, Natalie was talking about going out with your friends, I found that I'm still friends with all my friends, but on an individual basis.
Yeah.
Not as a group anymore. Because that group had the one connection, and that was the children. And I have not got that connection anymore, but I'm still friends with every single one of them. Still love them all. Still, if I need them, I know I can ring them. But
I think that's the really difficult thing, isn't it? Because the connection was the children, and they still have theirs and everything.
Of course it is.
I think, like this year, Morgan would have been starting full-time school. So he would have been starting, well, it would have been last September. He would be starting, so we'd be going into year 1 this year. Rhiannon is actually going to start school this year, so she's going to half days in school in the same school Morgan went to, in the same class with the same teachers. Morgan's school was absolutely amazing with him, and he was so happy there. And they've got a memorial garden there. And one thing that Rhiannon keeps saying is that she's going to go to school to be with Roberts, who is one of Morgan's teachers, Mrs. Roberts, and he used to just call her Roberts. He used to shout her name across the yard. You could hear him about 4 streets back, Roberts! And now all Rhiannon does is call him Roberts. But she's excited to go and be in Morgan's garden, in school, and be with Roberts. And it's so nice that she's got that kind of connection there.
Yeah, that's lovely.
And for her, it's really, and so talking to the parents of children in her class feels a lot easier because their children are at the same stage and they didn't know Morgan either, but they're going to be interacting with Rhiannon in Morgan's garden. There's a load of toy cars that they've put Morgan's name on the number plate because he loved cars. So they're still roaming around the yard, and that feels easier than talking to friends whose children should be where Morgan should be right now. And I think every year, like, I'm dreading the back to school photos, even though I'm going to love it for Rhiannon.
Yeah,
I'll do it for her.
Do you think that will make the day a bit easier because Rhiannon's going in that day? You can just concentrate on that year group and don't look at the other pictures.
I know, it's really difficult though, isn't it, when she's going to be in the same uniform. I think I've always very much viewed Rhiannon as her own person. She's always been a very distinct personality to Morgan.
She sounds it.
They both rubbed off each other so well. Like, he absolutely adored the bones of her, and she was more the kind of child that was kind of like, yeah, leave me alone, it's fine. Like, yeah, I love you, Morgan, but I'll speak to you later, sort of thing. And they were so different. He was always the loving, cutchy one, and he would want to cuddle her all the time and read to her all the time, and she was always the sassy, independent one. And it's going to be difficult, I think. And because it was such a small school, so many of the older children, so we were talking about grief in, older children and teenagers. Morgan was quite well known to a lot of the year 4, 5s and 6s, to the point that when he passed away, I think the whole school body was rocked really by a lot of these, year 5 and year 6. They've probably never had a family member pass away, let alone someone younger than them who they'd see every day in school and they used to talk through the gate. And I have a lot of conversations with young children who like to come and sit in our front garden, because our front garden is decorated as a little memorial for Morgan, and they just come and sit in my front garden, and I hear them talking to Morgan on the Ring doorbell. And
that's
it's
so lovely.
It is so lovely. Like I said, some days it can be really hard, but I would never want them to stop that, because I'm sure that Morgan absolutely adores it, because he used to love attention. Pretty much. And he used to love making people laugh, and that's why they all used to come and watch him through the gate, because he was funny.
It is so hard. I know we were saying earlier, before we started recording, that it's just really difficult with the wider friendship group of all the kids, the other kids that are impacted, and the lack of support that's out there for them, and the lack of understanding, and that's really difficult. And you saying that with the kids at the school, it's the same across all the schools. They've most children, thankfully, I guess, have probably only seen like a grandparent or somebody older die, or we're actually taught in books and, education, it's only really older people that die, isn't it? You don't really see. So it only happens in the movies, which means it doesn't happen to you in real life, doesn't it?
No. Yeah.
And then when somebody in your real life who is younger dies, then that suddenly becomes very real for them.
I think it impacts them all their life, because a lot of the parents will stop and say to me, they talk about Morgan a lot, and not in a bad way, but they will remember him. And that's comforting to me, that someone will always remember that little boy called Morgan that passed away when they were in school. Because I've spoken to a couple of people since who have recalled similar stories of children that passed away when they were in school, and that they still think about. That's comforting.
I do think, though, that primary school deals with it better.
I would definitely probably agree with that.
Yeah.
I think teenagers are much more difficult to gather together collectively in that sort of emotional way, because in the primary school we had T Havan, so the hospice when Morgan passed away, they would go and do an assembly for the school, and the local pastor from the church went and did an assembly about grief and death and things like that. So that's much easier to do for young kids.
Yeah, teenagers, I think they're like the forgotten grievers. I don't think they get any support. Very, very little support.
I think it's just because they're more complex, aren't they, as individuals, that it's actually harder, I think.
I also think that secondary schools don't have to offer that, and it's up to the individual school what they offer and how much support they offer.
Are they actually guided on what support to offer? Because I know that, like, Morgan's school is guided. Rhiannon's got a play therapist. She's got T Havan, who can offer guidance if they ever strike difficulty, and they'll often give advice for other grieving children. And it's nice to have that resource, but maybe secondary schools don't have that resource, because part of what we do with the charity is bereavement boxes. So we send boxes to families a couple of months after maybe like a couple of weeks or a couple of months after the funerals happened. And the idea behind them is to tell the family that we are still thinking of you. We see your grief, and we see that you're still there and that you're still grieving. Because I tend to find that once the funeral was over, the world just suddenly started turning very fast again, and everyone went back to their normal lives, and it was kind of done and dusted for them. And I kind of really struggle with that transition part of it. The lead up to the funeral kept you busy because you had the funeral. The funeral happens, and the next day just feels like it's like any other day. And it was really bizarre. I didn't know what to do with myself, or where to go, or who to see, or even what to say to people, because all people would say to me for the next couple of days was, it was a lovely service. I'm like, yeah, it was a funeral.
Yeah.
As funerals are.
I've read that you actually watched the funeral was recorded, and that you've actually watched it back.
I watch it quite frequently, in honesty. I find it really comforting to watch the funeral, because we made sure it was a celebration of life and not... I said to Adrian, luckily the vicar is a very close friend of mine because we were in school together, and I remember saying to him, I don't want it to be this whole morose affair. Like, people are going to cry anyway, and it's a funeral. But I said I want it to be like funny, and I want you to say the word boobs, because Morgan used to shout booby all the time. That was his favourite thing, was breastfeeding, and he used to love shouting booby at the most inappropriate times. So I said, you say booby in the funeral, please. And he was like, okay, that's fine. Because I said, that was him, and he would have shouted booby if he was there. I didn't want it to be this whole, I'm going to stick some, hymns in, all things bright and beautiful, things like that. It just felt so, I don't really know, I don't really know how to explain it.
It wasn't Morgan.
He was 3 years old. Like, everything was a party to him. Like, he would turn up in life, go into Tesco's was like, a big event. Everything was a big event. And so his funeral, his celebration of life, as we called it, had to be just him, all over him. And that's exactly what it was. You know, the sermon, the poems that people read out, the speeches people gave, because Matt stood up and gave a beautiful speech. And it's really comforting because it just reminds you of all the ways that Morgan was loved by everyone else in a collective way, not just me in my own head talking to myself about how much I love Morgan.
I followed your journey online, and you had a lot of people, didn't you? Your community really turned up for Morgan on his celebration of Life Day, didn't they? And painted the streets in rainbow colours and shops, and people stood in the streets, didn't they, for the procession?
It's an incredible it's only a little town, really, anyway, but it is definitely shows that people can pull together. And so many people wanted but never knew Morgan, but everyone kind of knew Morgan somehow through someone, because or me or Matt or whatever. But they were all just absolutely incredible in the way that everyone came together. And even like the Rainbow Road, they painted that. It's actually being repainted on Saturday because it's faded a little bit. And they're saying it'll forever be known as the Rainbow Road now. We can't let that go because, you know, my house is still painted like a rainbow, for God's sake. They did that on that day. And people, you know, it does remind them of Morgan, but I think it reminds them more of kind of the hope we were trying to present with Morgan, that he, despite everything that he went through, you know, he still had a smile until, well, the moment that he died with a smile on his face, but he still had a smile for everyone. He still had so much joy for life. And that was kind of what I wanted people to remember about him. And it's how I want to live my life going forward. Like, I don't know what's around the corner tomorrow. I know that I have to live the rest of my life without my son, but I've got my daughter and I've got all these other families I support and this beautiful world that I'm still supposed to be in. And so I've got to live for him. And so I always say to Matt that, all right, there's 3 of us now, there should be 4, but we can live for 4 people. We can do it all. You know, we don't have to live a sad life, but we can still be sad, but not live a sad life. I think lots of people expect us to constantly, you know, be sad, but I don't know what people expect. I don't think people know what they expect either. And I think, you know, lots of people always say to me, oh, you're so strong. And I think that probably you've both heard that as well. And I remember thinking, well, I would love to have any other choice, but to be strong. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to be strong, but what was the alternative? What else was I supposed to do?
There is no.
And so being told that I'm strong just kind of be like, well, I'd really rather not be. Thank you. I'd really rather still have my son and not have been through that and not carry grief and PTSD and I'd rather not do any of that. In fact, I'd rather be a weeping puddle of mess on the floor, because I think that would be easier than sometimes getting yourself out of bed every day and convincing yourself it's still worth washing your hair, you know?
Yeah. I just remember reading your post, I think, that said online that you were heartbroken but didn't live a sad life. And I thought, if I'm honest, I'm just the same. You know, there is so much in my life to be thankful for, but it's really hard to actually be brave and say that out loud when everybody expects you. I feel like everybody expects me to not say that there are parts of my life that I still enjoy. And then sometimes that in turn makes me feel guilty for then, you know, when you do have those guilty moments. But I don't know whether it's a pressure I put on myself.
It is a pressure you put on yourself, because I don't think anybody would expect you to be other than how you are. How we all are.
What's one of the things that people always say to you, you know, it makes you want to appreciate life and, you know, and you've got to live life to the full. And again, I've literally just said it a minute ago, like, you never know what's around the corner, because you don't know what's around the corner. It's true. But alternatively, like, it's not, I feel, an answer that the answer isn't just to stop living, is it? Because what does that
doesn't achieve anything for them.
No, you know, that Morgan would still be dead, and I use the word dead quite firmly there, because, you know, that's the reality of it, and you know, and that really, really hurts, that he is dead and that's that. But regardless of how I live my life from now on, he will still be dead.
Yeah.
And so what's really important is that I take what he taught me in his life and what I learned from being his mother and bring that through into my new life without him. So when I see him again, I can tell him all about it.
Yeah, but he'll already know. Exactly that.
I know they'll be proud. They'll all be proud that we carried on, and we got to keep going for them.
Yeah, we have,
because that's what they wanted for us. Because I always think if I, got diagnosed with terminal illness or whatever, and I was looking at leaving Rhiannon behind, I'd want her to be happy.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what Morgan would want for me as well.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do it sometimes.
Oh, it's bloody hard. It's just so hard sometimes, isn't it?
Some days it's easy to get up and do something you enjoy. Like I'm trying to kind of, at this stage of my grief, I'm trying to make a mental note of things that fill my cup and things that empty it. And some things are very emotionally draining for me, and so I kind of put those in an emotionally draining category and try and limit my exposures to those activities, such as children's parties is a big one, especially because there's lots at Morgan's age. All his friends are turning 5 this year, and it's it's very emotionally draining, as much as I'm so pleased that their children are growing up and I want them to have a lovely birthday, I want them to have a nice time. It's just too hard to do that. But since Morgan's passed away, we've made a big effort, myself and my husband, to go and see all the bands we've always wanted to see. And so I think I've seen more live music in this year than I've seen in my entire life. But those sorts of things, it's those life experiences that you're sitting there going, it's to live life to the fullest, to do things you enjoy.
Yeah.
And then this creating this sort of Venn diagram where everything crosses in between. And I've started going to the gym, and that's helping a lot with kind of like rising anxiety I seem to suffer with about it's a weird anxiety. It's an anxiety about situations I might come across. Rather than anything. It's like going to Tesco's and worrying about who you're going to bump into. And I've done that age-old thing where you see someone, you think, I've just not got the energy to have a conversation with that particular person right now. Nothing bad on them, but I just don't have that emotional capacity. And ducking down an aisle you didn't mean to go into, and inevitably coming out of that aisle and bumping straight into them. It's that anxiety of bumping into children in the street, and it's really hard to manage, actually, because I'm preempting things that might never happen.
Yeah, but if you could preempt some and reduce some of them, like I know to avoid the time that they all come out of school, if I could be driving down the street and think, oh no,
that's a
I've
real
got the
trigger
wrong
for
time.
me.
Yeah, and seeing the school uniforms, and I'm like, oh, why did I come past at this time? I'm usually on the ball and I know to go the other way, and then I haven't got the trigger. And our children, Brad had left school, but it's still a trigger.
It's still a massive trigger to see kids in school uniform that are Bradley's height and size from the back walking down the street. Even though, like Karen said, Bradley had left school, but that still is a massive... And I don't know why it takes me by surprise every time either, It's like, surely I should be used to that by now.
It's almost like you can kind of shutter it off a little bit when you're thinking about your normal day-to-day stuff. But it's a reminder. And I think one of the Sarah Ryan poems that she's written recently, and every single one she seems to upload seems to hit me right at the moment, that I don't know how she does it. I know it's because she's a grieving person as well. But, one of her recent posts was just about how for a second you forget, but just a millisecond, and then you blink and it hits you all over again. And it is just as fresh as the moment it happened. And it's that when people say it gets easier with time, And I often say it actually doesn't
Gets worse.
get any easier. It gets worse. But
do you think it gets worse because over time we feel like we hide it more from other people? Like, you're not
I
so
think it's a
open
big
with
part of it. I also think it's kind of, it gets worse because the longer we have to live without them, the more we grieve the experiences we didn't get to have. And, grieving something that they're missing, especially when you lose a child, is kind of like every time you go to a wedding, I'll sit there and think, I never get to see Morgan get married. Or every time you go to a fifth birthday party, a sixth birthday party, a seventh birthday, it will always be something that Morgan never got to have. And I think to have those constant reminders in your life, and you do develop coping mechanisms, and I think you do get better at carrying it and channeling it into things that you need. But there's still always going to be those days where it's really, really hard. And in society, we probably don't talk about our kind of like longitudinal grief, if you will, because it's difficult to have those conversations with people, because it's not like I could walk into a birthday when Morgan, one of his friends turns 9 and turn around and go, you know what, this just reminds me that Morgan's never going to turn 9, because everyone around me would just, it wouldn't be appropriate.
You'll have ruined the day.
Yeah.
You'll have brought the mood down.
But that's my reality. And so in your head, you have to sit there and you have to think it, and you're sitting there going, where is the safe space where I can tell this? And that's where you might go into, go and speak to friends who are bereaved and say,
I text Karen.
Yeah, I've had a really tough day today because this happened. And they'll go, I know.
And that's going to get even worse, because with all that is, as the years go on, we've got the unfairness. And that will keep raising its ugly out that, it's so unfair they're not here. And it's not just individual little things, it's all of them added together. And it's going to be tough. We're all at the same place in our journey. Morgan died 3 days after Emily.
Oh, really?
So Emily was 3 weeks after Brad. So we're just all there in the same place, aren't we? Different
I've had
ages.
so many people reach out, that people, obviously, because there were lots of people that followed our story that were probably at quite similar places. I actually have made some very good friends with some of the parents who passed away in the same room as Morgan in the hospice. And one of them, Emily, who lost her daughter Violet, I think it was about 3 weeks after Morgan passed away, in the same room. And she said she remembered 3 weeks before watching my TikToks about us going to Tea Havan, and said feeling so awful for me. She said, and even then I didn't think that would ever be me. But she said when they told me that, that Violet was going to pass away and that we were going to go to Tea Havan, she said to me, I already had watched you, and so all I had to do was follow in your footsteps, and I already knew what to expect. And that's why one reason I'm so grateful that I did share it as I did, because I've come up against criticism. I have, because, I've had people say, Morgan's too young to consent to you sharing everything about him like this. And okay, if you look at it that way, then yes. But also, I would have raised him to be as open and honest as me, because that's the sort of person I always am. And I always...
There's nobody that knows your son better than you.
No.
And you made that decision, and you would know you wouldn't do something against his wishes.
No, and he loved attention anyway, but that's by the point.
Emily used to pretend she didn't love attention, but
really?
Yeah.
I used to say, because people would sometimes say as well, you're doing it for sympathy, you're doing it for attention. And I'm sitting there going, where does this narrative come from in society that when we are honest about our situations, we're honest about how we feel, and we share something unabridged, yes, it's painful, but people are going through things like this all over the country, all over the world every day, and aren't feeling like they can be honest about that experience. And I'm not saying it's for everyone to share their journey so openly, because I always say it's up to you what you want to do. sharing Morgan with the world made me feel better because I felt like I was making a difference by sharing my experience to help other people. And I speak to a lot of people that I have helped, and they don't share their journey openly, but they say, you know, being able to follow mine made them feel not so alone.
Yeah.
And that's important to me. Whether I've made a difference in one person's life, like one grieving person's life, that will be enough for me. But I know that I've helped a lot of grieving people, and I know I've helped a lot of cancer parents as well through advocacy work and support work, and making sure that we're funding projects that are helpful to them, but also representing them as a charity. Now I'm able to say, well, this is what the parents want, and advocating for them in services. And like I said earlier, like I went through all that and walked away empty-handed, but I must be able to use that experience for some good. Otherwise, what was the point of it all? What was the point of going through all that if we weren't going to learn something from it? And granted, I'd rather be uneducated. I'd rather not have gone through it, but I am here now, and this is, you know, this is what's in front of me, and this is what I've got to deal with. So I need to channel that into something that means something. Otherwise, it all just feels a bit pointless.
Thank you so much for listening, and this is the end of part 1 with Natalie. We chatted so much more to Natalie about Morgan's charity, Morgan's journey, why we all do what we do, and we continue to share all of our thoughts and our journeys with grief. So please don't forget to join us next week to hear the rest of what we talked about. Natalie seems to explain things in such a thought-provoking way. She is incredibly insightful, and she resonates really deeply with us, I think. So we will leave you this week, but thank you so much for listening. We hope that you found this episode really helpful. So it's just left for me to say, grab yourself a cuppa, find a comfortable spot, we'll journey through grief together. Join us next week for part 2, guys. Thank you.